Alright guys, this is my 2000 Ford Ranger. You can tell I've already done some work on it. This is a 2.5 liter. They call it a Lima block, built in Lima, Ohio, as the reason for the name. Had a misfire stalling issue, and it's been going on and off for like 2 years, and it's progressively gotten worse. To give more details about it, it's usually an intermittent rough idle. It usually goes away if you just give it the slightest bit of throttle. Every now and then when you come up on a red light, sometimes it'll start running rough and then it'll eventually stall out. If you do like a full throttle, like you're trying to pass somebody and then try to immediately slow down or immediately let your foot off the gas, and the engine just drops RPMs and just straight up dies as you're rolling. This also happens, I guess, if you have a manual transmission and you attempt to change gears real quick. The RPMs drop and it dies. It doesn't happen as bad if you gradually let off the throttle. And as far as codes, you probably won't even see any codes. So when I started diagnosing this issue, went into mode 6. I checked for codes first. I could eventually get it to throw a code if I kept snapping the throttle and getting it to run rough for quite a bit. It eventually hit the misfire counter threshold, and not just a check engine light, but eventually got a pending code for P0301. I did this multiple times, and it bounced back and forth between cylinder 1 and cylinder 2, and every now and then I'd get a P0300 for random because it couldn't detect which one it was. So then I went into mode 6, and I wanted it on 4Scan, and I looked at the raw data for the misfire counts. It was 1.28% for cylinder 1 and 0.79% for cylinder 2. Cylinder 3 and 4 were showing fine. The fuel trims were showing great. They were showing pretty much plus or minus 3% at all times. Every once in a while you'd come to a stop, it starts running a little rough, and fuel trims would jump up sometimes like plus 18% for short term, and then come right back down to normal. But it still kind of run a little bit rough, which kind of pulled me away from rejector or vacuum leak, but I went ahead and tried to test it anyway. I used a vacuum gauge. I got normal good readings for vacuum gauge. The needle really didn't flutter at all. Everything seemed fine. I did a compression test in all cylinders. I think I had 185, 180, 180, and 170, 175 for the cylinder 4. So even the lowest pressure reading cylinder didn't even have an issue. Cylinder 1. Cylinder 2. Cylinder 3. Cylinder 4. I got a fuel pressure gauge I put on there. I was reading right at like 61 psi, which I think for the 98 and up Rangers with the returnless, it's supposed to be 60, 65, 70. So I mean, that was fine. I got an injector pulser, so I put it on each individual injector, primed it up to whatever the priming PSI is, and ran a certain amount of pulses to see what PSI the injectors would go down to after doing a certain amount of pulses, and each injector was dead on the same. So the flow of each injector was the same. Ohmed out the injectors. The injectors look good. Autolayer control valve responded correctly. In forescan, you have bidirectional control, so anything below 20% is pretty much off, and anything up to 60% duty cycle is pretty much full open, and anything in between 20 and 60% pretty much moved with the duty cycle movements. The EGR, check flow on it. I did go ahead and replace the EGR valve because I did a like a leakage test on it, and sometimes if the valve closed slowly, it wouldn't seat all the way. It's like the spring force wasn't high enough. But changing it out didn't really make a difference. The evap system, I went ahead and blocked off the vacuum line for it, and it didn't make a difference. Along with, I did a smoke test on the entire intake system, and the only leak was at the autolayer control valve at the vent. This is fine. This is a metered vent. It's not really sucking in air. It's more of a, just releasing pressure to atmosphere. Anyway, if you do a smoke test and it leaks, it's fine. The IAC cap on it. Sorry, I got a lot of background noise here. As far as spark, I checked for spark on these coils right here. Every single one of them, all 8 tower, or it was over an inch of spark, and these are like really deep terminals in there. So I mean, that was fine. This is a dual spark system, so it's hard to have an ignition related issue on these, because you'd almost have to have like a bad wire on one side and a bad wire on the other. Contrary to popular belief, they don't fire one. Well, somebody thinks that people think that the dual spark packs, one fires on exhaust, one fires on compression. This is a waste spark system, yes, but I mean, that's, even if you had the single coil pack, it would do that. The dual actually does fire both at the same time on compression, and the waste spark part of it on the companion cylinder, 1 and 4, 2 and 3, they fire on the exhaust side. But either way, spark was good. Spark plug wires ohmed out perfectly. Went ahead and changed spark plug wires and plugs because it's been 100,000 miles since the last tune-up. I was just shaking my head on this one, and then I thought of the old dollar bill trick where you take a dollar bill, hold it up flat against your hand, and hold it up against the tailpipe, and it was fine. It looked like it was just blowing up against it, and eventually you could see the receipt or dollar bill just start sucking up into the tailpipe. So to me, this almost sounded like a sticking exhaust valve, where the exhaust valve is slightly open on the intake stroke, and it's actually causing a vacuum in the tailpipe. So I've had some buddies that had good luck with sticking valves and such, using Marvel Mystery Oil. I know it's a snake oil or whatever, but whatever, $5, I'll try it. So anyway, I put it in the crankcase, and what was crazy is it really helped out the issues. Like, the misfire counter stopped showing misfires, and this is right before an oil change, so I ran it for a little bit and went ahead and changed the oil. But when I changed the oil, it seemed like the misfires came back, and I thought this was weird, and I actually really thought it was a placebo effect. But then I started thinking more and more about it, and it was, I think I topped in intermittent low compression, and I finally found a post, or maybe 2, hidden deep within the Ranger forums, of a couple other guys saying, recessed valve seats. Never seen a picture of it, but they just said they took their heads to the machine shop and they said they had recessed valve seats, just like the 3.0. Well, I took this information, started thinking about it, and I decided I'm going to pull the head on the truck. The one last thing I did is I bought a 1-month subscription to IATN, which is International Automotive Technicians Network. It's pretty much a forum, except it's pretty much technicians. I mean, you pretty much got to say you're a technician to join, and you're paying for it, so that kind of keeps a lot of the garbage out of, hey, it's the mass airflow sensor, it's this, and they just start telling you all kinds of parts to change out. But if you type install misfire 80 to 90% of them, you know, and these are complex topics. These are topics that a regular tech couldn't figure out himself. And 80 to 90% of them all came up with recessed valve seats and confirmed it by pulling the head. And, you know, I'm sorry, I don't really have much to show you right here in this scene, but I'll switch over and I'm going to show you what the head actually looks like that I pulled. Alright, here we go. Here's the cylinder head that I pulled, and as soon as I flipped it over, now remember, I said the misfire count's percentage about 1.28 and on cylinder 1 and 0.79% on cylinder 2. So looking at this, 1 should have a real big issue, and 2 should have a minor or not as bad, and 3 and 4 should be fine. Well, I don't know how well this picks up here, but hopefully you can tell that that valve is sunken down. This one, it is sunken down just a little bit, but not as bad as number 1. And then 3 and 4, well, that was popped up, but because it's on the cam. But anyway, I measured the distance between the top of the valve and I guess you'd call it the valve seat deck. Hopefully this, okay, that's still fine. So what I did is I took a socket. It's about the same diameter as the valve. Went ahead and put a caliper. Sorry, I'm doing this. Put a caliper on, zero it. Put this on there, and then you can kind of use it to see the difference. You know, the deck height. I'm getting 30 thousandths on this one, 20 thousandths on this one, and these are 0 and 0 dead on. So it definitely looks like a recessed valve. Now you're wondering, well, why is this intermittent? You know, why? What's? Give me the explanation on this. And I drawn a little diagram, and I'm going to show you how this is an issue. Alright, hopefully you can understand or visualize what I'm showing you here. So this area right here is going to be the valve seat. You know, you get your valve, here's your spring, here's your cam follower. This is a roller rocker style on these Rangers. Here's your hydraulic lash adjuster, which is, this is a metal tube. There's an inlet port on the side, and this sits, you know, in a I guess we call that in a boss. This pumps up essentially a little piston. There's a check ball, spring, yada yada yada. Anyway, and this just moves up, you know, just a little bit to take up the lash in your system. If it wasn't for this automatic lash adjustment, you'd have to adjust your valves manually ever so often. Just like I think it's Hondas are big on manual lash adjusters. Anyway, let's just say the valve originally the face would seat here, you know, and this wasn't worn away. I've read articles where they said that, you know, over time, essentially these make little micro bonds, the valve to the seat, and every time it moves, it breaks those bonds, and it essentially welds, breaks, and the material slowly, or you know, erodes away, and that's why you get these deeper and deeper and deeper. You know, my truck's got 265,000 miles on it, so this has done this millions of times. Anyway, but one thing we do know is this valve is sunken in. So what does that do? Well, when the valve sinks in, you know, the valve stem height gets taller, you know, in reference to the head. Okay, if it gets taller, this spring is not as compressed as much, so the spring relaxes, you know, the same amount as this gap right here. All right, so that's less spring force. Well, at higher RPMs, this lash adjuster has more oil pressure, and it's pushing. Now it's not pushing, you know, essentially your cam's going to be the pivot point at this point. So hydraulic pressure causes this lash adjuster to pump up, and there's less force now pushing against this force, and this essentially counteracts this to where, you know, the valve, instead of sitting perfectly there, it is just, you know, slightly open, allowing exhaust gas to come through. So you're getting incomplete combustion because there's no compression there, or you're not getting the force of the combustion fully staying in the cylinder and pushing against the piston. Now, this is after a high rev situation, and then HLAs they'll bleed down a little bit slowly. The check balls in there aren't perfect. The pressure bleeds down. So if you slowly let your foot off the throttle, or you constantly stay at idle, like less than 1,500 RPMs or something like that, or less than 1,000, just barely cruising along, or idling along, it won't hardly do it, because the pressure doesn't get high to counteract this, and it's already stayed pretty much at a bleed down. So hopefully, I'm hoping this gives you guys a good visual of what's going on. This seems like quite a common problem, because you see so many forum posts about guys having similar issues. They throw the parts cannon at it. I mean, they fire away. They throw everything on it. It's crankshaft, camshaft sensors, spark plugs, wires, coil packs, idle air control valves, EGR valves, mass airflow sensors, idle or the temp sensors. I mean, every sensor on the car. I mean, I've seen people put new PCMs in it and it still doesn't fix it. And 99% of the time, these forums become dead. Let's just stop answering. They just got away, and I guess you can think either they got rid of the truck or something. And sometimes they come back and just straight up say, "Oh, I ended up getting rid of the truck and got something else." And there's only like 2 guys on forum posts that ever came back and finally said, "Yeah, I had recessed valves, but that was it." So hopefully you guys, I think there may be one with an actual picture, but it's really hard to tell on his. Hopefully you can see that. This gives an explanation, and hopefully all the details I've given you can help you come to the conclusion whether or not you have it. I think that the dollar bill against the tailpipe is probably is a good indicator. And to capture this on a compression test, to me, you'd have to disable one of the cylinders, have a compression gauge in it, almost like you're set up to run a running compression test. Just rev the hell out of the engine till it dies, and immediately hit the check valve or the pressure release on the compression tester, and then crank for a compression test. Because to me, you rev it up till it dies, this will still be pumped up, and those first few seconds it won't have time to bleed out the pressure, and then you run your compression test, and then you should show low compression on that cylinder, is the way I see it. I guess you can pop the valve cover off and then take the followers out and measure valve height. That's kind of hard to do. I mean, if you're not, I mean, I'm not a machinist, but I make do with measurements and stuff like that. But I just wouldn't trust that measurement unless you had it severely recessed. I heard some people having 1/4 inch depth on some of these, which is ridiculous. I mean, mine's, what's 30,000? It's 1/32 of, I mean, I don't even know how you'd see 1/32. To me, I think you'd mismeasure it. But anyway, hopefully this helps somebody out. I'm gonna take this to a machine shop. It does look like I have a minor crack between 2 of the valve seats. We'll see what the machine shop says. I'd rather have it machined and fixed locally than buy a reman, because I've heard bad stories about those, and I just don't want to deal with, if I got a bad one, taking it back. I trust more local people than I do sending a product off. Again, sorry I don't have many visuals here. It's like 3 main scenes here, and I'm just showing the engine bay ahead and this, but I'm trying to give all the information I can. I'll post in a description. I posted on one of the forums kind of my information if you want to read through it. It's pretty much everything I've said here, but if you have the same issue and you end up pulling the head and you had the same thing, let me know in the comments. Pulling the head on these is really easy. It's 2 hours. Most of the stuff I've done before, I've taken the exhaust manifold off, take the intake manifold off, I've changed the timing belt. The only extra thing you have to do is just pull the head. It is pretty much it. Replace your bolts. These things are torque to yield. It's like 70 foot-pounds plus 90 degrees. The only extra thing you have to do on pulling the head is if you're pulling the timing belt, you should already know you're pulling the power steering bracket on the right. There is a bolt that goes into the head. Actually, I think there's 2 bolts that go into the head. The one underneath the AC compressor. Actually, let me go ahead and show you. Alright, so there's a bolt that goes, you take your AC compressor off, and there's a bolt underneath that goes through this area here into the head. And I think there's another bolt from the power steering bracket. And then the alternator bracket has 1 bolt. You do not have to remove the alternator bracket like the service manual says. I have no idea why it says that. But make sure you unplug the oil pressure sensor. It's that white connector right there, and pull her out. I mean, these things, your head's probably gonna be pretty stuck, so I'd put the lifting eyelet on the front back on and put like a pry bar and try to pry up on that outlet. I wouldn't try to put a screwdriver through the block in the head. That'll probably just damage it. Alright guys, thanks for watching. Sorry if I move the camera around too much while I'm talking, but again, if this helped you out, please like the video, subscribe. I do a few of these little, technical vehicles on Rangers every now and then, and let me know if you had this issue and if this was the reason you had the same issue. Alright, thank you. Bye.